The story begins with a billionaire man who goes to the mountains of Alaska with his wife for a photo shoot. But in one of the coldest places on Earth, something was waiting eagerly for them. Charles, a billionaire businessman, had countless ventures running successfully, all of them highly profitable. He had so much wealth that even if he stopped working, he could easily live the rest of his life in comfort. For now, though, Charles was traveling with his wife, Mickey, who was once a professional model, to the snowy mountains of Alaska. He wanted to do a special photo shoot with her, one that would become a cherished memory forever. Since money was never an issue, Charles hired an entire crew for the project. The photographer was Bob, who brought along his assistants and a few other crew members. Together, they boarded a private plane and set off toward the icy Alaskan peaks. Surrounded by massive snow-covered mountains, Charles had booked a quiet resort where they would be staying. After a long journey, they finally arrived. The resort owner welcomed everyone warmly, but also warned them about some strict safety rules. This wasn't an ordinary place. The resort was deep in bear territory. The owner told Charles, Mickey, Bob, and the entire crew to always keep food properly packed and all doors and windows tightly locked. Otherwise, the smell of food could attract dangerous bears from miles away. Hearing this, everyone became cautious, but stayed calm. If they followed the rules, they would be safe. Charles, Mickey, and the rest of the crew went to their rooms as night slowly fell. The temperature dropped even lower, but they were all well prepared with warm clothes. That night, Charles couldn't sleep. Feeling hungry, he decided to go to the kitchen. The resort was dark, so he grabbed a lantern and slowly made his way there. When he entered, he noticed a piece of meat lying open on the counter, and the door was slightly ajar. The owner's warning flashed through his mind. His heart began to pound as he moved closer to shut the door. But just as he reached out, a huge shadow appeared. A massive bear stood right in front of him. The bear roared and charged toward him. Terrified, Charles stumbled backward and fell. But before he could react, it was revealed that this wasn't a real bear at all. It was his crew members wearing a bear costume to scare him. It was all part of a plan. Mickey's plan. Today was Charles's birthday, and she, along with the crew, wanted to give him a surprise by scaring him first. Everyone came out laughing, and soon the atmosphere filled with joy and celebration. Though Charles had been terrified for a moment, he quickly joined in the laughter when he realized how much effort they'd put into surprising him. They all gathered to celebrate his birthday. Mickey apologized later and gifted him a beautiful watch. One of Charles's assistants also gave him a knife engraved with something special, but Charles didn't pay much attention. He wondered, why would I ever need a knife anyway? The celebration ended happily, and everyone went to sleep since they had to wake up early for the next day's photo shoot in the freezing cold. The next morning, Mickey began her solo shoot. Bob, the photographer, instructed her to pose in different ways to get perfect shots. But as the shoot went on, Bob started flirting with Mickey, something Charles noticed from afar. It didn't sit right with him. He didn't like anyone getting too close to his wife. When Mickey's solo shoot was done, Bob suggested that she should have a male partner for the next session. At that, Charles immediately said, "That male partner will be me, she's my wife, and we came here to enjoy together." But Bob refused bluntly. According to him, Mickey needed a more handsome man for the shoot, not an old guy like Charles. Hearing that, Charles didn't react much, but deep inside, he already had suspicions about Bob's intentions. Bob was actually a very old friend of Charles. They had known each other since college. But Bob never really liked him. The reason was simple. Charles had become a billionaire businessman, while Bob was still just an ordinary photographer. Naturally, Bob always tried to find ways to make Charles feel miserable. Now, Bob was searching for a male model who could do the photo shoot with Mickey. Ironically, Charles, the man who had paid for the entire trip, wasn't even allowed to be Mickey's partner in the shoot. From the beginning, everything seemed unfair to Charles, and he had no idea how close Bob and Mickey's relationship might become later on. Who knew? Maybe the two of them could even be planning something wrong behind his back. While thinking about this, Bob suddenly noticed a framed photo hanging nearby. Inside it was a man wearing a rugged hunter's costume. The moment Bob saw that picture, he immediately knew. This was the perfect man to model with Mickey. He quickly took a photo of the frame and went straight to the resort owner asking, "Where can I find this man? He's perfect for my shoot." The owner laughed and said, "Finding him won't be easy." Then he told them about that hunter, the one who had been living in Alaska's mountains for years. His name was Kevin. The owner provided the exact location details of where Kevin usually stayed. After discussing, Bob and his team decided to go meet this man in person. At the same time, Charles also wanted to explore the place a little more, so he said to Bob, "I'll come with you. I want to see Alaska from up close." Bob couldn't refuse him. Soon, they were all ready to board their small plane, setting off toward the location where the hunter was said to live. From high above, they could see endless stretches of Alaska's icy mountains, breathtaking yet dangerous. But none of them realized how close they were flying to a deadly fate. Following the coordinates given by the owner, they eventually reached the marked area. According to the map, this was where the hunter lived. There were several tools and resources scattered around, but Kevin himself wasn't there. Instead, they found a note left behind by him. It clearly said that he had temporarily moved to another location, and he had even written down directions to reach that new place. After a quick discussion, Bob and Charles decided to continue following the trail. They still had plenty of fuel and a functional plane, so they could easily fly across Alaska multiple times if needed. They boarded again and headed toward Kevin's new location. But as they flew higher, the temperature began to drop even further. The cold became harsher, cutting through their skin like knives. And then, the real danger struck. While the plane was gliding smoothly through the air, a massive flock of birds suddenly collided with it. The impact was violent. Feathers and metal clashed in chaos. The plane lost its balance instantly, and one of the engines started failing. Within moments, it began spiraling downward. The crash was devastating. The pilot was killed instantly, and the aircraft was completely destroyed upon impact with the freezing water below. Those who survived, Charles, Bob, and one of Bob's assistants, struggled to escape the wreckage and swim toward the shore. The water was so cold that if anyone stayed in it for even a few minutes, they would freeze to death. Somehow, the three managed to crawl onto the icy ground, shivering violently. They looked around helplessly. There was no sign of civilization anywhere, only endless wilderness. Luckily, they found a small matchbox among the wreckage. With trembling hands, Charles lit a few sticks and started a small fire. The warmth gave them slight relief as they huddled close, hoping that someone might find and rescue them. But this was the middle of nowhere, a remote Alaskan wilderness where only wild animals roamed. There was no one to save them. After waiting for hours, Charles finally broke the silence. "We can't just sit here," he said. "We should go find that hunter. Maybe he can help us. He must have supplies. We can use them to survive and make our way back to the resort." Bob and his assistant agreed. It seemed like their only chance. So the three men started walking through the snow-covered forest, heading toward the hunter's new location. But little did they know what awaited them ahead. After walking for some time, they suddenly heard a loud noise coming from the woods. When they turned toward the sound, they saw a massive bear emerging from the trees, enormous, wild, and terrifying. It wasn't just any animal. It was a monstrous beast staring directly at them. The bear had already spotted them, and there was no doubt it was going to attack. Charles, Bob, and the assistant immediately started running for their lives, because if the bear caught them, there would be no chance of survival. If we ever get trapped in such a situation where a dangerous bear is chasing us, how would we survive? Brown bears are much more dangerous compared to other bears, and if such a bear comes right in front of you, even a single second shouldn't be wasted. There are many ways to protect yourself. One of the best options is to place a burning piece of wood in front of it, because no matter how wild an animal is, it's always afraid of fire. But if that trick doesn't work, the next best option is to move to a higher place, climb a tree, or get onto large rocks. If even that fails and the bear comes too close, then the most famous survival technique is to pretend to be dead. Lie down completely still and don't respond until the bear walks away. But in this case, Charles, his assistant, and Bob panicked so much that they ran in the opposite direction. They completely lost their way, and the bear was still chasing them. Ahead of them was a deep waterfall, so deep that even if they jumped, survival was almost impossible. The bear was getting closer from behind, and there was no way forward. Bob and his assistant were terrified, but Charles stayed calm and used his brain. He had seen many survival movies, and recalling those tricks, he quickly broke down a tree and made it fall across the gap, using it as a bridge to cross to the other side. He told Bob and his assistant to go first, and they carefully started moving forward. Now Charles was the only one left behind, and at that moment, the bear appeared again, heading straight toward him. Charles was in the middle of the bridge when the bear noticed him and began shaking the tree violently. Charles lost his balance and ended up hanging from the bridge by his bag. That bag contained a few resources and some flare guns, which he could have used to send a signal or connect with someone. Unfortunately, Charles lost his grip and fell hard into the water, getting injured in several places. Luckily, Bob and his assistant managed to grab him before he went over the waterfall and pulled him safely to the side. The bear, still above, stayed there for a while and then disappeared into the woods. The three of them somehow calmed themselves down and started walking again in the direction where the hunter was supposed to be. But even after traveling for hours, they couldn't reach that location. It was clear now. Either they were lost or just moving in circles because they saw the same spot again that they had passed earlier. Night fell, and the temperature kept dropping. They had no resources left to eat or survive with. When morning came, Charles still had a knife, the same one that had been gifted to him on his birthday. Using that knife, he gathered some branches and plants and started a fire. Later, he handed the knife to his assistant and told him to tie it to a wooden stick to use it as a spear and catch some fish. The assistant understood and immediately went to the nearby river. Meanwhile, Charles and Bob continued maintaining the fire. But suddenly, they heard the assistant screaming. Both of them ran toward the sound and saw that the assistant had accidentally stabbed his own leg while fishing. His leg was badly injured, so Charles quickly tried to treat him. After bandaging the wound properly, Charles told Bob to either burn the blood-stained cloth or bury it deep underground, because the smell of blood could attract the bear back. It was now late at night and Charles had built a small shelter for all three of them to rest in, especially since the assistant couldn't walk due to his injury. They sat near the fire trying to stay warm when Charles suddenly noticed something. The same piece of blood-stained cloth lying nearby. Bob had disobeyed him and hadn't burned it. Realizing this could be dangerous, Charles went to pick it up. But at that exact moment, the terrifying bear appeared again. The bear immediately attacked the assistant and started dragging him away into the woods. Charles panicked, grabbed a burning stick and tried to scare the bear off, but the bear was enormous and began growling loudly. Bob, terrified, pulled Charles back because they both knew they couldn't save the assistant anymore. Sadly, the bear killed the assistant and began eating him. Charles felt horrible but was powerless to stop it. After escaping, Charles and Bob climbed up the mountain ranges. Now, only the two of them were left to survive in this freezing place. They had no food and no proper resources to stay alive. By morning, snowfall had begun, making things even harder. But Charles refused to give up. He built a small trap to catch wild animals, another trick he had learned from survival movies. This is exactly what we should also do if we ever find ourselves in such a dangerous situation. After setting the trap, they somehow managed to capture a small animal. They had finally caught that small animal, which meant they could now eat it and regain some strength and nutrition for their bodies. But just then, they suddenly heard the sound of a helicopter approaching from above. The helicopter was flying right over their area, so Charles and Bob started shouting, trying to draw attention toward themselves. The only problem was that the helicopter was flying at a very high altitude, and because of the dense forest below, there was little chance anyone could spot them. They kept shouting desperately, but it was no use. When they finally reached an open clearing, it was already too late. The helicopter had gone far away. Now Bob, completely frustrated, began blaming Charles for everything. He angrily admitted that he had always been jealous of Charles, of his success, his wealth, and how far he had come. He told Charles that all their problems were because of him. Bob confessed outright that he envied Charles's money and achievements. They had started this journey together, but Charles had surpassed him in every way, and that was something Bob could never accept. Charles, however, stayed calm and didn't want to argue further. He tried to control the situation and focus on finding a way out instead of fighting. Both men were still starving, and the dangerous bear could appear at any moment to attack them again. When they reached a river, Charles decided to try and catch some fish. He sat quietly near the water, waiting patiently, but soon they heard footsteps. The same terrifying bear had returned. Seeing it, both Charles and Bob ran as fast as they could into the forest. They spent the night there, surrounding themselves with a ring of fire to keep the bear away while they slept. Fear filled the air, and the entire night passed under constant tension. When morning came, Charles told Bob clearly that if they wanted to move forward safely, they had to kill that bear once and for all. No matter where they went, the bear would keep following them. Bob was terrified and immediately refused. He thought it was too dangerous, but Charles was confident and determined. He took a sharp knife, tied it to the end of a wooden stick, and hung a blood-stained piece of cloth on it to attract the bear. His plan was simple. Once the bear came close, he would kill it using that sharp weapon. Seeing Charles's courage, Bob couldn't step back anymore. He decided to stand with him. Both armed themselves and waited. Soon, the massive bear appeared and attacked them ferociously. Their weapons were barely affecting its huge body. The bear struck Charles hard and threw him into a ditch, injuring him badly. Bob rushed to help, but before he could reach him, the bear turned on Bob and mauled him too. Bob was badly wounded, but Charles managed to distract the bear and pull its attention toward himself. The beast charged at Charles again, but at that crucial moment, Charles thrust his weapon straight through the bear's body, piercing it completely. The enormous creature collapsed and died right there. Exhausted but alive, Charles and Bob lit a fire, cooked the bear's meat, and ate it to regain their strength. Then they used the bear's thick skin to cover themselves, protecting against the freezing cold. The warmth from the fur gave them comfort and new hope. Now that they had recovered a bit, both men were ready to continue their journey toward the hunter's camp, their only chance of getting home. But there was still one major problem. They had no idea which direction to go. Completely lost, they stood still, uncertain of their path. That's when Charles remembered the small clock his wife had given him. He opened it and took out one of the tiny metal needles, placing it carefully on a leaf floating on water to use it as a makeshift compass. But using a clock needle to find direction isn't as easy as it sounds. In reality, if you place a small piece of iron on a leaf and float it in water, it can help detect direction, but only if you magnetize one end of it first. You need to rub one side of the metal thoroughly so that the particles align magnetically. After that, you place it gently on the leaf and set it in water. Within minutes, the end that was rubbed will point toward the magnetic north and the opposite side will indicate south. Another easy method is to use your own hair to find direction. You can take a dry strand of hair, rub it well, and follow the same process. This can also reveal the correct direction. Using these tricks, Charles was able to figure out which way they needed to go. Feeling confident again, the two began moving faster and with more focus. After some distance, they were lucky enough to spot a small house in front of them. There was no sign of anyone nearby, so they went inside to check. Even after calling out several times, no one responded. The place was completely empty. Bob found a bottle of alcohol there and immediately started drinking it, while Charles opened up a map to locate their resort and calculate how far they still needed to travel. Inside, they even discovered a small boat that could help them travel through the water route. While Charles was preparing to leave, he noticed a box, the same one that had held his knife. When he opened it, he found a bill inside that he hadn't seen before. Looking closely, he realized it was the purchase bill for both the clock and the knife, and it was signed in his wife Mickey's name. That's when the shocking truth hit him. The clock hadn't been bought by his wife for him. It had been bought for Bob. This clearly meant that Bob and Charles's wife were having an extramarital affair. The betrayal was too much for Charles to bear. When Bob came inside, Charles confronted him directly and demanded the truth. Bob, completely drunk, didn't hide anything. He confessed openly, saying, "Your wife doesn't love you at all. She's only with you because you have money. If you weren't rich, she would never have been with you." Charles was furious, and now Bob had him at gunpoint. Bob threatened to kill him because he had always been jealous of him since the beginning. But Charles remained completely calm, knowing that Bob was drunk and could do something stupid in anger. Bob continued to threaten him, shouting that he would kill Charles, marry his wife, and then take all his property. That had been Bob's plan from the start, and now it seemed he was ready to carry it out. Charles didn't fight back. Instead, as Bob kept yelling, Charles slowly began walking away, trying to trick him. While traveling deeper into the forest, he led Bob to a place where there was a hidden trap beneath the ground, something only Charles knew about. As soon as Bob stepped on that exact spot, the ground gave way, and he fell straight into the pit. Sharp wooden stakes pierced through Bob's body, leaving him in unbearable pain. If Charles left him there, Bob's death was certain. Either he'd bleed to death or be eaten by wild animals. But Charles couldn't walk away, because no matter what, Bob was still his friend. Determined to do what was right, Charles climbed down into the pit and somehow pulled Bob out. Bob was in extreme pain, but more than that, he was filled with guilt. He realized what a terrible mistake he had made, trying to kill the very man who was now saving his life. Charles managed to drag Bob to a small boat they had found earlier near the river. Using the current, they started moving downstream. Bob lay there helpless, looking at Charles with tears in his eyes, and said that he had never been a good friend. He confessed that he had always wanted to be like Charles, a successful businessman, but he never managed to achieve it. Now, he feared that after everything that happened, Charles would never forgive him or want anything to do with him again. But Charles softly interrupted him and said, "This isn't the time for that. I forgave you long ago because you're my best friend." After traveling for a while, they finally reached the riverbank. Charles built a small fire to keep Bob warm. Bob was severely injured, so much that he could barely breathe. Charles told him to rest for a while, promising that once they got home, he would make sure he received proper treatment. Bob began to cry and asked for forgiveness for everything he had done. He admitted that Charles's wife had always been innocent. It was Bob who had trapped her in his web of lies. Hearing this, Charles calmly said that he had already forgiven both of them, Bob and his wife. As they were talking, they suddenly heard the sound of a helicopter. The rescue team was nearby. The forest was opening up into a clear area, which meant that if they could signal, there was a chance they could be seen. But Charles's voice was weak, and no matter how hard he shouted, the team couldn't hear him. Then Charles realized this was their only chance. He took some damp leaves and threw them onto the small fire, creating thick smoke. The dark smoke rose high into the sky, visible even from a distance. The rescue team noticed it and immediately turned the helicopter in their direction. Charles was overjoyed. Finally, they were going to be rescued. He turned to tell Bob the good news. But by then, it was too late. Bob had taken his last breath. He was gone. Charles was heartbroken but gathered his strength, lifted Bob's lifeless body, and carried it toward the rescue team. After being airlifted, they finally made it back to the resort, where police officers and several media personnel were already waiting. The entire incident had already become public. May was there too, tense and worried about both Charles and Bob. When Charles reached her, he had a deep sadness on his face. Without saying a word, he placed a wristwatch in her hand. Bob's watch. May immediately understood. She knew Charles had learned everything about her affair with Bob. Whether Charles would forgive her or not was his decision alone. But what Charles had gone through in that forest had changed him forever. Later, when the media asked him how the others had died, Charles told the entire story, step by step. His story spread quickly and became famous. But even with all his wealth, Charles couldn't bring back his dead friend. Bob was gone, and no amount of money could buy life again. Perhaps this was the greatest lesson Charles had ever learned, and that's how our story comes to an end. So, viewers, how did you like this story? Tell me in the comments below. And if my explanation touched your heart even 1%, then smash that like-in button and help us reach 50,000 likes. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more thrilling and emotional stories. We'll meet again soon with another amazing video. Until then, take care and bye-bye.